The sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow over the sleepy town of Oak Ridge, Wyoming. It was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened, just the hum of daily life. The local diner, known as Maggie's Roadhouse, was a place where farmers, truckers, and the occasional traveler came to grab a hot meal, share stories, and warm up during the chill of late fall. I was there that afternoon, quietly enjoying my lunch after running errands. My name is Daryl. I'm in my early 40s. But I've learned over the years that age doesn't always show on the outside. What does show, though, is that I'm in a wheelchair. I've been this way since a motorcycle accident years ago. But life goes on, right? I don't let it slow me down much. I'd just taken my usual seat at the far corner booth by the window when the noise from the parking lot caught my attention. From where I sat, I could see a small group of men hanging out by their motorcycles, laughing loudly, their voices cutting through the calm of the parking lot like knives. It wasn't uncommon for bikers to stop here. Oak Ridge was on the way to the mountains, after all, but there was something about this group that felt different. I watched them for a moment, trying to ignore the rising tension in my gut. There were 5 of them, leaning against their bikes, wearing leather jackets adorned with patches that seemed to carry an aura of trouble. Their laughter grew louder as one of them elbowed the others, pointing in my direction. "Hey, look, it's the wheelchair warrior," one of them shouted. His words were meant to sting, to mock, but I refused to let them see me react. Instead, I slowly turned back to my meal, trying to block them out. But they weren't done yet. One of them, bigger than the rest, with a patch that read "Black Riders" on his vest, pushed himself off his bike and started walking toward me. His boots thudded heavily against the pavement, each step making the air feel thicker, more oppressive. I didn't need to turn around to know what was coming. I had been through enough of these encounters to recognize the signs. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You lost? Need some help? Or just out here looking for trouble?" His friend snickered behind him, and I could feel their eyes on me, their judgment, their disgust. But I didn't flinch. I didn't respond right away. I kept my focus, my gaze fixed on the menu in front of me, hoping they'd get bored and walk away. It wasn't the first time I'd been harassed like this. But today felt different. Today, something about these guys felt dangerous. "You just gonna ignore us?" the man asked, stepping closer. "You think you're too good for us? Huh? Ain't nobody too good for the Black Riders." I could hear the challenge in his voice, and the others were egging him on. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening on the armrest of my chair. But I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I wasn't about to play their game. I moved to stand up, pushing myself toward the door. But as I got closer to the exit, one of the bikers stepped directly into my path, blocking me with his large frame. "Not so fast," he sneered. "Where do you think you're going?" I stopped, my heart racing for a moment. There was no way out without confronting them. But I wasn't scared. Not yet. Instead of responding with words, I reached for my pocket and pulled out my phone. Their laughter died down for just a moment, but I could feel their eyes on me as I dialed. I didn't say anything at first. Just let the phone ring, letting them stew in their confusion. The leader, still smirking, took a step closer. "You calling the cops?" he jeered. "Yeah, good luck with that in Oak Ridge." I didn't answer. I wasn't calling the cops. And I wasn't about to tell them what I was doing. I just let the phone connect and, after a moment, hung up. The tension in the air grew heavier, and I could see the unease in their eyes as they realized something was off. But they didn't know what was coming. The seconds ticked by slowly, The silence between us thick with tension. I could feel their frustration mounting, the uncertainty beginning to creep in. These men, used to getting their way, weren't used to having their authority challenged, not by someone like me. Not by someone in a wheelchair. I could almost hear their thoughts racing. What was I up to? Who was I calling? Were they in danger now? They must have thought I was some lone wolf, an easy target for their taunts and threats. A man who couldn't fight back. But they were wrong. The leader of the group took a step back, his gaze flicking between me and the parking lot, as if expecting something to appear. His smirk faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and doubt. He wasn't sure what I was capable of, and that was unsettling him more than he cared to admit. You think someone's coming to save you? The man sneered, his voice betraying a hint of fear. Who exactly are you calling? Huh? Your little band of misfits? I didn't answer him. Instead, I took a deep breath and let my phone fall back into my pocket. The weight of it reassuring. I wasn't scared. I didn't need to say a word. Everything was under control, even if they didn't understand that yet. I simply rolled my chair to the side, positioning myself against the diner's brick wall, as if I had all the time in the world. Calm, composed, waiting. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a younger guy with a collection of tattoos snaking up his arms, shuffled nervously on his feet. I don't like this, he muttered under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes were darting toward the exit, his fingers twitching, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The leader caught his eye and shot him a warning glance. But even he could feel it now, the unease creeping through the group. They were losing their edge. For the first time, they weren't sure they could handle the situation. Minutes passed. The group of bikers, once full of bravado, had begun to show signs of restlessness. The air hung heavy, and I could hear the shuffle of their boots on the gravel as they paced back and forth. The silence was deafening, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but none daring to speak up. And then it happened. At first, it was barely a sound. A low rumble, distant yet unmistakable. It felt like the ground beneath us was shifting, as if something powerful and unstoppable was approaching. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sound grew louder, closer. The leader's eyes snapped to the road, his expression shifting from skepticism to worry. He knew what was coming, even before he saw it. His posture stiffened as the first glint of chrome appeared in the distance, catching the late afternoon sun like a flash of lightning. The roar of engines filled the air, shaking the ground beneath our feet. I could see their heads snap around in unison, their eyes wide with disbelief. They hadn't expected this. Hell, I hadn't expected it either. But I knew it was coming. A convoy of motorcycles, more than 24 strong, appeared on the horizon, their black leather jackets gleaming under the sun as they sped toward us. The bikers, their helmets adorned with patches that read, "Guardians of the Road," were sight to behold, commanding, intimidating, and united. The leader of the group, tall, with a silver beard and piercing blue eyes, led the convoy. He moved with a calm, deliberate grace, his presence alone radiating authority. As the convoy pulled into the parking lot, their bikes roared in unison, a symphony of power that sent a shiver down the spines of the men who had been harassing me moments earlier. The leader of the Black Riders took a hesitant step back, his bravado crumbling like dust. He muttered under his breath, barely able to get the words out. Who the hell are these guys? But deep down, he knew, they weren't just some random group of bikers. They were a force, a brotherhood that commanded respect. The Guardians dismounted their bikes with the precision of a military unit. There were no words, just action. No posturing, no threats, just a collective presence that radiated power. They spread out across the lot, creating a protective barrier around me. They didn't need to say anything. Their silence spoke volumes. The silver-bearded man, their leader, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the group of black riders. His gaze landed on May 1st, and he nodded in my direction. "You good, brother?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unspoken strength. I didn't answer right away. I simply nodded back. My pulse was steady. The tension in my body had eased. I wasn't alone anymore. The black riders, once full of arrogance, were now visibly shaking. They knew they were outmatched. The leader of the Guardians took a step forward, his presence commanding. "What's this all about?" the Black Rider's leader asked, though his voice cracked with nervousness. He was trying to regain some of his earlier authority. But it wasn't working. The Guardians weren't intimidated. "This," the Guardian leader said evenly, "is about respect." The words hit like a punch. For a moment, I thought the Black Riders might try to push back. But they didn't. Instead, they looked at each other. Their bravado shattered. One of them, the young tattooed biker, spoke up. "We didn't mean anything by it. Just having some fun. You know?" The Guardian leader's gaze narrowed. "Messing around? Harassing a man in a wheelchair isn't messing around. It's cowardice." The silence that followed was deafening. Not a single one of the Black Riders could find the courage to argue. The tension hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. The Guardians stood tall and silent, their presence now a palpable force, while the Black Riders, once so sure of their dominance, shrank back under the weight of their actions. Their leader, the man who had started all this, now looked like a child caught in a lie. His bravado had all but evaporated, replaced by a look of desperation. I could see the shift happening, right before my eyes. The power dynamics had completely flipped. The Guardians weren't just a force of intimidation, they were a statement. An embodiment of everything the Black Riders had failed to understand. These men were not out here to prove something by bullying others. They were here because they believed in something far stronger: respect, loyalty, and honor. The leader of the Guardians stepped closer to the Black Riders, his eyes cold, assessing each one of them like a predator sizing up prey. His gaze locked onto the Black Rider's leader. And for a moment, no one moved. There was no need for threats, no need for shouting. The weight of the Guardian leader's silence was enough to bring the whole group to heel. "You think this is funny?" the Guardian leader asked, his voice low but carrying a sharp edge. "You think it's a joke to pick on someone who can't defend himself? You think it's funny to harass someone just because you think you can get away with it?" The leader of the Black Riders opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His eyes darted nervously to his crew, who were now avoiding his gaze, ashamed of their actions. He knew it was over. He knew they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. "You," the Guardian leader continued, his voice steady and powerful, "owe this man an apology. And not just any apology. A real one. Not because you have to, but because it's the right thing to do." I watched the scene unfold. Not a word from me. Just observing. I didn't need to say anything anymore. The Guardians had taken over. And they were doing what needed to be done. The Black Rider's leader tried to stand tall, trying to salvage whatever dignity he could. But it was clear that the weight of his actions had crushed him. His face reddened as he looked at his men. But there was no support. They were already mentally defeated. One by one, their eyes fell to the ground. Their earlier arrogance now nothing more than a distant memory. "I'm sorry," the leader muttered finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't enough. His words were hollow, as if he was being forced to say them. But they were the first step. He cleared his throat and tried again. This time with more conviction. "I'm sorry, man. We shouldn't have done that." The guardians didn't flinch. They stood firm, watching him carefully. The silver-bearded man took another step forward, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm. "You're damn right you shouldn't have," he said, "and you better mean it." There was another pause, a beat of silence that seemed to stretch forever. The leader of the Black Riders looked down at the ground, his hands trembling slightly as he struggled to maintain his composure. Finally, he looked up at me, his face a mixture of regret and humiliation. "We're sorry," he said again, this time louder and with more sincerity. "We didn't mean to, well, we shouldn't have done it. I'm sorry, man." The other bikers muttered apologies of their own, but it was clear they were just as broken as their leader. They were no longer the tough, untouchable group they had been when they first rolled into the parking lot. They were a pack of cowards, too afraid to face the truth they had been running from. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. I had no need to speak anymore. Their actions had already spoken louder than any words could. I had been harassed and belittled, but I had stood my ground. And now, the ones who had tried to break me were the ones who were broken. The silver-bearded man, still standing firm, gave a final nod. "Good. Now get out of here. And don't ever come back to this town. If we see you again, it won't end so politely." The Black Riders didn't argue. Without another word, they turned and made their way to their motorcycles, their once confident strides now replaced by a hasty shuffle. The hum of their engines, which had once sounded so threatening, now sounded like the retreat of defeated men. They didn't dare look back as they sped off, their pride shattered in the dust behind them. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The weight of the situation finally lifted, and I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from winning a fight or using force. It was the peace that came from knowing I had stood up for myself. From knowing that even in the face of intimidation, I had remained true to who I was. The Guardians, their mission complete, began to mount their bikes and rev their engines. But this time, the sound was different. It was a sound of solidarity, of strength in unity. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that no one is ever truly alone. There's always someone watching, someone who will stand with you when you need it most. I looked over at the silver-bearded man, who was now heading back to his bike. He caught my eye and nodded, his expression softening for the first time since his arrival. "Anytime, brother. You are never alone." As the last of the Guardians revved their engines and rolled out of the parking lot, I took a moment to reflect. The diner, once filled with the tension of the moment, now returned to its usual hum of activity. But for me, things had changed. I had stood my ground, and I had been seen. And in that quiet victory, I had found strength not in the physical, but in the unwavering belief that no matter who you are, you deserve respect. I turned back to the diner, the soft chime of the door as it swung open marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The parking lot was finally quiet. The low hum of the Guardians' motorcycles faded into the distance, leaving only the soft sounds of life resuming inside Maggie's roadhouse. The silence that followed their departure was almost surreal, as though the world had taken a deep breath and let out a sigh of relief. I rolled back into the diner, the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The patrons who had been watching the scene unfold from the windows had quietly gone back to their meals, exchanging hushed whispers among themselves. The atmosphere was lighter now, but I could feel the eyes that lingered on me as I passed by their tables. Some of them smiled, Others nodded. But no one said a word about what had just happened. They didn't need to. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, met my gaze as I entered. She gave me a soft smile, her eyes scanning me for any signs of distress. I must have looked like a different man after the confrontation, stronger. Somehow, everything okay out there? She asked, her voice gentle but with a hint of concern. She had seen the bikers earlier, and though she hadn't witnessed everything, she knew something had gone down. She didn't push me for details. It wasn't her place, and she knew it. I returned her smile, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee I had come here to enjoy. Yeah, everything's fine now, I said. Just had a little misunderstanding. She raised an eyebrow, obviously curious but respecting my need for privacy. Good to hear. Your usual? She asked, already reaching for the coffee pot. Yeah, that'd be great, I replied, settling into my booth. As I sat there, the weight of the events from just moments ago began to settle in. I could still hear the roar of the Guardian's engines in my mind. A reminder that there was always strength in numbers. The kind of strength that comes from standing up for what's right. Even when the odds seemed stacked against you. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. Those men had tried to intimidate me. To make me feel small. They had thought they could push me around because of my disability. Because they believed that a man in a wheelchair was an easy target. But they had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of my silence, the strength of my resolve. And they had underestimated the strength of the community around me. The Guardians hadn't just come to my aid out of some misplaced sense of pity. They had come because they knew what it meant to stand up for each other. To protect those who couldn't always protect themselves. It wasn't just about muscle or bravado. It was about honor, about respect. And when that was threatened, they knew it was time to act. I glanced out the window, watching as the last of the Guardians' bikes disappeared down the road. For a moment, I felt a pang of gratitude toward those men. They hadn't just protected me, they had taught me something important. They had shown me that strength doesn't always come from how much you can physically endure. Sometimes, it comes from standing firm, no matter the situation, and knowing that you're never really alone. As the waitress brought me my coffee, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The kind of peace that only comes after facing down something difficult and walking away with your dignity intact. I wasn't the man those bikers had thought I was. I wasn't a target to be picked on. I wasn't a helpless victim. I was a man who had learned to stand tall, even in the face of adversity. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me. My hands, steady on the mug, were a testament to everything I had endured and everything I had overcome. The road to this moment hadn't been easy, but I had gotten here. I had made it, and that was enough. The world outside the diner continued to turn, but for a moment, I felt like I had found my place in it. The kind of place where you can stand strong, where you can be who you are, and where you can expect the same respect from others that you give to them. Thanks, I said to the waitress, who had returned to refill my cup. She smiled at me warmly, and for the first time that day, I felt like I was truly home. As I sat there, savoring my coffee and the fleeting moments of peace, I couldn't help but think about the lesson I had learned. The world can be a cruel and unforgiving place, and it's easy to let fear and doubt control you. But standing up for what's right, no matter how big or small the battle, will always be worth it. And when you do, you might just find that there are others out there, like the Guardians, who will stand with you, ready to remind you that you're not as alone as you think. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy, knowing that I had not just survived, but thrived. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my days.